I was, using drugs by 12. Alcohol was my first, but I was shooting meth by 17. In the beginning, they work. Again, like this is what I think we don't want to acknowledge, right? They serve a purpose and it's just that they then become a problem. Really, it's about the childhood abuse, which I had, multiple forms: physical, sexual, verbal, etc. I'm really financially unstable. I'm feeling very emotionally debilitated. I was having physical problems from the drugs, and I was living with it every day, the stress of not knowing what was going to happen to me. My recovery wasn't just substance recovery, right? I had PTSD and I didn't know it, severe anxiety, and eventually at 20 years sober, I ended up a federal judge, which, is sort of an unusual arc for someone who shot meth for many, many years.
All right, everybody, we got another episode on our hands, and I have Mary Beth O'Connor on. Mary Beth, thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what you're all about?
Yeah, so I actually call my story the name of my memoir, which is From Junkie to Judge: One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. And really, it's about the childhood abuse, which I had, multiple forms: physical, sexual, verbal, etc., which led to early drug use and early addiction. I was, using drugs by 12. Alcohol was my first, but I was shooting meth by 17.
Wow.
And I did not get sober till 32. So it was a really long haul. I also had other traumas during that time, other sexual assaults, a violent boyfriend. And then when I got sober, my recovery wasn't just substance recovery, right? I had PTSD and I didn't know it, severe anxiety, had to recover from the trauma, a very common combination to have to work on more than one thing. And then eventually, of course, I had to deal with my professional destruction and start getting back on path for that. And eventually, at 20 years sober, I ended up a federal judge, which, is sort of an unusual arc for someone who shot meth for many, many years. And now I'm retired and I do a lot of speaking and training and writing in the recovery space. So that's sort of like the overview, the big overview.
Wow. So you have definitely lived a very colorful life then.
Yeah, colorful is a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
So let's start from the beginning. I mean, that is a very young age to start getting involved in substances. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Central Jersey. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so alcohol was to start, and it's just basically because you had a dysfunctional family life?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's about pain management, right? I mean, I'll say two things that the drugs do for you. First of all, in the beginning, they work. Again, like this is what I think we don't want to acknowledge, right? They serve a purpose and it's just that they then become a problem, a separate problem. But for me, it was sort of like a twofold benefit. One is that it helped me push my pain down, like all the pain from all the many traumas. And I was living with it every day, the stress of not knowing what was going to happen to me, of not having sort of like my behavior and the consequence, they were not closely connected. What happened to me had little to do with what I did. And that's very, very stressful. So the drugs made that be sort of like at a more of a distance, it sort of numbed the pain out, pushed it away. But also, they made me happy in the beginning. It was like I could sort of like, have fun with my friends in a more joyful, way. I felt more connected to them, more bonded. These were like two very strong positives that made drugs hard to resist for me.
And so you did that until you were 32, you said?
Yeah, 32. I mean, I had a couple better years when I went to college, but and I say better, like I'm a lawyer and I parse words. Better and good, not the same word.
Yeah.
Improved for a couple years, not great, but a little better. But in the middle of my senior year of college, I started using meth again regularly, and it was another 10-year run. And so I was 32 years old when I got sober. So my whole drug history is 20. At 32, I've got 20 years of drug history behind me.
Jeez, that's wild. So was meth basically your drug of choice?
Yeah, I mean, as my terminology is, I was very committed to meth. I mean, before meth, I did alcohol to excess. I did weed to excess. I did pills to excess. I did a lot of acid my sophomore year of high school. But once I found methamphetamine, for whatever reason, it was just biologically, biochemically the
Mhm.
right fit for me.
Mhm.
And that was the drug that was always my, top tier preference. I would sometimes do other things,
Mhm.
but not, I mean, the last 10 years of my using, I rarely did anything else sometimes, but it was occasional. So yes, drug of choice in a very like, capital D, capital C version of that.
And so what did you go to college for? What were you studying?
I left Central Jersey, came to California for college. I graduated from Berkeley and I was a history major. And
Oh.
my goal had always been to go to law school. Like I come from a blue collar family. I was the first member of my family to go to college.
Mm.
But my goal was ultimately to go to law school.
Mhm. And, what was it that at the age of 32 that was kind of the turning point? What was it that made you finally decide that you will need to turn things around?
Yeah, and I want to sort of caveat that with like in I have what we would stereotypically call a hard rock bottom, but I do want to emphasize you don't have to get that bad. Like today we really try to help people get the idea of sort of interrupting their drug addiction, their
Mhm.
substance use disorder, which is the medical term for addiction. We try to get people to interrupt it at like the more mild or moderate level, but
Mhm.
I was really at that sort of stereotypical, pretty rock hard bottom.
Mhm.
And so by 32, I couldn't hold a job. I mean, I was using meth all the time. I graduated from college with a Berkeley degree, good grades, and then I worked my way. You know how after college you're supposed to work your way up the corporate ladder?
Mhm.
I worked my way down the corporate ladder,
Ah.
like because I couldn't hold a job and because I was using meth. And so I'm really financially unstable. I'm feeling very emotionally debilitated. I was having physical problems from the drugs. I was just feeling trapped and hopeless and, just miserable. And my partner was ready to throw me out. And so, like many of us, I mean, some people have that light bulb, like they get a DUI or something
Mhm.
like that.
Mhm.
But for many of us, it's like it was for me, which is like a cumulative kind of wearing down process.
Mm.
And that's what it was. I just felt so miserable and so trapped, and so fearful of what was going to happen to me if my partner threw me out that finally I was ready to say, well, maybe I should go to rehab.
Right. That was actually gonna be my next question. So you ended up going to rehab then?
I did, and I went into a longer term program. These 30-day programs, they're often not long enough, and so and I will say it frustrates me because sometimes we judge people as if, well, you went inpatient to a program, you should be fine. It's like 30 days is not long enough for a lot of people,
Especially
and
if
it
you've been
was.
using for 20 years.
Yes, yes, that's right. And if you also have another mental health disorder like
Mhm.
PTSD or anxiety or whatever, but I did go into a longer term women's program,
Mhm.
so it was a 90 days minimum, and I was actually in there for 5 months. So it was inpatient and it was long term.
Mm. And, what's interesting is that you were leading this life and you were at Berkeley, which is a very good school, and you were getting good grades.
Yeah, but those were the better years, and I emphasize again, better years, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I was still using to excess and using way more than the people around me, but I was using not that much meth. I was using more on the weekends, not sometimes it rolled into the week, but not every day. There,
Mhm.
at least having a couple days break in between,
Mhm.
but still to excess, still chaotically. But it
Mhm.
and I worked half time when I was at Berkeley. Again, I don't come from a family with money, right? I had a half-time job when I was at Berkeley.
Mm.
But those were during the better years. I
Mhm.
wasn't able to maintain that level of functionality when I started using meth again on a regular basis.
And so, what was the pain or the trauma that you kept trying to push down that you were masking with the drug abuse?
I mean, it really started, from the beginning. Like I had my mother definitely, she could be violent, but the biggest problem was that she really wasn't bonded to me. I was actually left for the first 6 months of my life in a convent, so there was that, attachment disruption right from.
Mm.
But even when I lived with her, she wasn't really, she didn't really care what I did. She wasn't focused on what my feelings were or what my thoughts were or any of that stuff. She was very erratic, very focused on her own needs, very volatile. But then when I was 9, she married my stepfather, and that's just things just escalated to a much worse situation because
Mm-hmm.
he was really violent with her, and that alone, I think we sort of underappreciate how witnessing parent on parent violence is a
Mm-hmm.
trauma in and of itself, right? Even if
Yep.
you're never yourself.
Yep.
But I was. I mean, he was violent, physically, sexually violent. My mother actually got more violent because she was under so much stress herself.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it was all of that. I had sexual assaults outside the home as a teenager, but also as a young adult. I moved in with a violent boyfriend in college. It was just like a
Mm.
long history of a wide variety of traumas and violence.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before in the podcast because I've read and I've listened to other, psychiatrists and therapists say that addiction itself is not genetically transferred. It's the trauma behind the addiction that's transferred that causes the addiction. So if you grew up in a violent home, then you are going to be violent in your next home as well. And then it just continues. And then so I found that interesting that it's the behavior itself of whether it's abuse, sexually or physically, emotionally, that's what's transcended down the genetic line, not so much the genetic component of substance abuse.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for them to parse that because the families that have substance abuse usually have the other things going on. But
Correct.
you're right. It is about, so there's a thing you may have heard, probably have, called an adverse childhood experiences
Yeah.
score.
Mhm.
It's a list of, 10 questions of things that happened in your childhood. Well, if you have a ACE score of 4, your odds of developing an addiction are like 3 to 4 times higher than the national average, right?
Wow.
And my ACE score is 7. And so things like my odds of shooting, of intravenously using drugs, were, I think, like, I forget, something like 75 times the national average of
Wow.
risk, it's very high. So there is a very strong connection between violence in the household or any type of trauma. Even things like bullying can be, is a trauma for kids,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
And you're right. I mean, if the parents haven't resolved their own pain, then
Mhm.
it's really going to often get transmitted down the line to the kids because the parents aren't behaving in a nurturing, way.
Mhm.
They're reacting to their own feelings, reacting to their own pain in ways that aren't healthy for the kids.
Have you ever read up on I know that as of lately things like ketamine are being used to help with addiction. Do you have any experience or knowledge behind that?
I mean, they're looking at a lot of different things. And so they're looking at, I mean, ketamine, they're looking at hallucinogens,
Mhm.
which looks like it might be helpful for depression.
Mhm.
One of the new things they're looking at for addiction is the weight loss medications.
Yes, the
People that have been,
GLPs.
the GLPs,
Mhm.
people that have been self-reporting that they not only
Yeah.
crave food less, but they crave alcohol or like shopping addictions or whatever. So they're doing research there. So there are a lot of new avenues. There's some about a stimulation to the brain, some
Yeah.
studies that are going on.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, I support all of the research because we want to know we want to have as many tools as possible
Absolutely.
because none of it's going to work for everybody,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so the more options that we have, the more people that will save, the more people that will be able to help. So
Yep.
I don't care if it's a drug that some people use for recreational purposes, if it can be used, in an appropriate way to help somebody with addiction or with their mental health or with their trauma, I absolutely support all of that research.
Yeah, and the caveat behind the GLPs too, I wanna mention is that it's microdosing. I know a lot of these doctors are over prescribing GLPs, which are causing some of the medical issues that are going on right now in the industry where, like, I think Ozempic right now has got a $2 billion lawsuit because people are losing their eyesight or their stomachs stop working. It's because doctors are over prescribing the GLPs when, to your point, it needs to be microdosed because it's much more beneficial for not only the weight loss, but also for these addiction problems that people are having.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I hear something new that looks like it's working, it's always exciting. And they have
Yeah.
done some preliminary studies on the GLPs that seem to support the anecdotal evidence. And now
Mhm.
they're doing, the bigger studies because, of course, it's a process. But
Yeah.
yeah, anything that works. But the other thing I will say is that one of my frustrations with how people view people who struggle with substance use is that there's sort of this assumption that everybody can get the help they need if they just, ask for it. And
Mhm.
that's just so not true, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
reality is that if you don't have cash and you don't have insurance, or even if you do, to get any treatment can be impossible or difficult. To get treatment that is evidence based of an appropriate length and sort of individualized to your needs is very unlikely in this country. I mean, it just doesn't
Mhm.
happen. But
Mhm.
we so for example, sometimes family members or the person struggling will say to me, my daughter, she's tried everything. She's been to rehab 8 times.
Mhm.
And then when I ask questions, what I find is she was given the same treatment 8 times.
Right.
you know, like nobody said, well, it didn't work the first 3 times. Let's do an individual assessment and see what else we could do to help her have a chance of succeeding next time. And so,
Definition of insanity right there.
yeah, they keep doing the same thing over and over. Most likely, she never got treatment for her PTSD or for
Mhm.
her
Mhm.
ADHD or whatever else it might be, right? That's the most likely scenario. And
Mhm.
so, or the treatment's too short, 20 days and you're out. There's no aftercare, there's no sober living, there's, no mental health treatment or even physical, no housing. I mean, it's very frustrating that we, we judge and stigmatize people when we're not really offering them the help that they need. And the truth is, I think it would be in the long run cheaper for
Yeah.
us to do that than the
Yeah.
way we're doing it now.
Yeah, and rehab is not cheap either.
Mhm.
It's not cheap. And I had somebody else on the podcast that works with veterans as well. It's the same thing. These vets come back with major PTSD,
Mhm.
and we just do not afford our veterans the proper care when they come back from war or being deployed. And I really feel for those people. And to your point, even people that are struggling with addiction, it's just they're not getting the care that they should be getting, because it's not a one size fits all
No,
situation.
no.
It's everyone. It's just like in the gym, right? When you're dieting or eating, everyone responds to food and physical stimulation differently. It's not the same across the board. Yes, there's generalities behind things, but a lot of it is very individualistic.
That's true. And the truth is, not everybody needs to go inpatient for rehab either.
Sure.
I mean, one of the benefits of catching people at the mild to moderate level is that an outpatient program might work very well for them,
Mhm.
or just working with a therapist who has addiction expertise, or giving them medications for their alcohol use disorder or their opioid use disorder. So it's not even that everybody has to go inpatient. There are other options,
Yeah.
especially if we offer people help at an earlier stage.
Mhm. So, what law did you end up practicing once you studied law?
Yeah, so I went to Berkeley Law when I was 6 years sober. When I was 39, I graduated at 42. Because remember, again, I didn't get sober till 32, right?
Yep.
And so, and I worked at a big law firm at first. I live in the Bay Area. I worked at a big law firm in Silicon Valley doing like business litigation,
Mm.
and then I went to the federal government and I was doing basically large class actions. I was, managing the attorney for large class actions for the federal government. And then I became a federal administrative law judge. I was appointed when I had 20 years sober in 2014. And so that was sort of the trajectory. Now I'm retired from that and I do other things, which I'm happy to talk about. But that was the trajectory of it.
Is the appointed, is that a voted in position or just appointed?
So, of course, there's all kinds of judges, state and federal and different systems. And federally, an administrative law judge, it is an appointment, but it's not the kind of judge where you have to go before Congress. It's a testing process and an interview process.
Mm.
But it is an official, federal appointment that they have to have cause, to remove you and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, even though I had a criminal record a little. I got arrested when I was 18 for methamphetamine and hypodermics, but that was expunged, and so that wasn't there. But I would never have gotten through like
Oh, right.
even though, look, when I was appointed judge, I had 20 years sober. Like, what difference did any of it make? I mean, the truth is that 5 years of continuous sobriety, you have an 85% chance of never relapsing again.
Mhm.
That's basically the same chance that a person without an addiction has of staying, of not
Yeah.
developing a
Yeah.
problem. So it
Right.
was really irrelevant in that sense. But people, the other side of that is people are less forgiving about like shooting meth
Yeah.
over, say, alcohol
Yeah.
or, pills or something, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a more of a moral judgment, which is part of why I openly discuss the fact that I shot meth. It's
Mm.
partially to try to reduce the stigma around that.
Mhm.
But also, you hear a lot about as if people can't recover from methamphetamine. And I want to be, saying out loud, no, actually, many people recover from methamphetamine. And
Mhm.
so, try to stand up for my peers, my people.
Right. So as a federal judge, were you on the bench working like you said class action like business lawsuits and stuff like that? Or were you doing all cases?
No. So when I was working for the federal government as a class action lawyer, I did a wide variety of like federal type claims. People are suing the federal government and I'm defending the government. But when I
Mm.
was a federal administrative law judge, federal ALJs, you work for a specific federal agency, and I
Mhm.
worked for Social Security. So I mostly did disability cases, and then some other
Oh.
security related cases. So that was the area that I was making decisions in.
So did you have cases, and if you can't talk about it, I understand, but did you have cases where you were, sorry, I don't know the terminology, but you were, what is it, overseen or, the
Making a decision on issuing decisions on, yeah.
yeah, if there was cases that involved, where the person with Social Security benefits had an addiction problem, did you have kind of a soft side for those people?
Yeah, so there's very clear law about when you can and can't get disability benefits if you have a substance use disorder. And just very fast, the basic standard is if you were sober, if you would still be disabled sober, then you can get benefits. But if your addiction is pushing you over the line from not disabled to disabled, then you can't. And so it's like
Mm.
it's statutory. It's like very clear. I had to apply that law.
Mhm.
Certainly many of the people that I saw had mental health disorders, a lot, and trauma or other type histories, and a lot of them either had substance problems or had in the past had substance problems. And sometimes it was hard to parse. Like one of the most challenging was if somebody had a psychotic disorder
Mhm.
and they were using meth. And
Mm.
so to try to figure out whether their symptoms, if they were their symptoms because of the meth or were they because of the psychotic disorder. But the other thing I'll add is that some drugs, alcohol included, and definitely methamphetamine, even if you get sober, at some point you might not fully recover from the psychosis. And so
Mm.
if you're sober and it's still, if it's still there, it doesn't matter how you got to the psychosis. If you're sober and you have the symptoms, it's still okay. But so it was those kind of things. I'm trying to treat people sympathetically and with respect, but I have to get the information I need so that I can perform the analysis that I'm required to perform.
So why did you decide to go towards the route of being a federal judge and not just stay practicing law?
I mean, it was a different challenge. I knew I probably would only be doing it, 7 to 10 years. It was sort of like getting toward the end of my career again because I was older when I started my legal career. I have been doing the type of law that I was doing for quite a while. There were some benefits about it's a little bit more of a predictable schedule, whereas litigation, is very, very unpredictable.
Yeah.
So there was sort of some lifestyle benefits to it. Not that it's an easy job; it's a tough job. You're making important decisions, but I could look ahead and see my next week or two with more predictability than when I
Mhm.
was, an attorney dealing with a class action.
Mhm.
But it was also a new challenge, and I always am looking sort of for the next challenge.
And so, after you retired as a federal judge, what's the next challenge then?
Yeah, so what I've done is I wrote my book I was writing as sort of a hobby when I was working mostly, but my memoir came out as I mentioned. I've written opinion pieces, like I've had pieces in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times and Recovery Today and others. Those are all on my website, junkie2judge.com. They're all in the everything I do is in the space of substance use, addiction, trauma, mental health, and recovery from all of it. Like that's my narrow defined area.
Mhm.
I also do. I speak. I do like I'll do a keynote at a fundraiser for a recovery organization. I do some trainings. I train lawyers and judges in substance use and how it impacts the legal profession.
Mm.
So it's very part time, but it's I try to think about where my story might have value, and where sort of that judge title, I use it as like an ear opening tool. You know what
Mhm,
I mean?
mhm,
People listen to me a little harder. So when I talk to them and I try to share information I think is important, I think they listen more.
mhm,
But because of that, I read every day the new studies that come out, the new articles, books about
mhm,
addiction and recovery, to make sure that I'm staying current, with what we know and what's going on.
mhm. Yeah. It's, I find all of that stuff interesting. I mean, even the legal side, man. I recently just rewatched A Few Good Men.
Oh,
I love that movie. I mean, the performances are amazing, but just watching, and I know it's Hollywood, but just watching how the legal system works is fascinating to me because it's so, I don't know, there's just so much behind it.
yeah. Although we don't do well on the substance side, right? I mean, I have a real I don't I really think we should decriminalize personal use of drugs. And there's multiple reasons why I have that opinion, but one of them is that our own government says that addiction is a mental health disorder. It's a medical condition, but we're
Mhm.
throwing a lot of people in jail for it.
Yeah.
So that's a contradiction. But also, we spend billions and billions of
Mhm.
dollars every year criminalizing drugs. We could treat 3 or 4 people for every one person we incarcerate, right?
Mhm.
So it's
Yep.
not a good use of our money.
Mhm.
It's not effective, and also there's a lot of ripple negative consequences once you get a criminal record for
Mhm.
employment and
Mhm.
housing. You're splitting up families by incarcerating somebody. People, even if they've given some kind of drug treatment, it's usually not evidence based or long enough,
Mhm.
and there's also a really big racial disparity in the way we enforce our drug laws. And
Mhm.
so, white people and people of color use drugs at similar rates, but people of color get arrested a lot more often. They get charged with felonies instead of misdemeanors. The sentences are longer. So for all of this,
Is that nationwide or is that kind of your experience in California?
it's nationwide.
Mm.
It's a little better, but it's still pretty significant disparity. It's
Mm.
it's very I mean, I've seen data just for California about 2 years ago. It's like 3 times as high chance of getting arrested. And it's at every level of the process. Your negative outcome is going to be higher for a person of color.
Oregon recently legalized pretty much every possible drug known to man, including steroids, and they just repealed that law because they were having so
Yeah.
many issues. But now your point of view is that it should be legal. Like how do you balance the two, right?
Well, they didn't legalize it. They decriminalized it, which is not the same thing. But I'll also say what happened in Oregon is that so they had decriminalization for all of 18 months. Okay. So we've had the war on drugs for 50 years and
Yeah.
it's been ineffective.
Yeah.
And in 18 months, they're judging the decriminalization, on top of which decrim happened at the same time that the fentanyl wave hit Oregon for the first time.
Mm.
So when you look at the Oregon, let's say, overdose death rate, which is one of the things the repeal was based on, Washington State did not decriminalize. Washington State got hit with a fentanyl wave the same time as Oregon. Their overdose rate is almost identical to Oregon's. So there was a lot of
Interesting.
blame put on decriminalization that is actually not due to decriminalization.
Mhm.
The other thing is that Oregon had historically had one of the lowest levels of treatment availability of any state in the country. And they had only barely started releasing the money that they were saving from not incarcerating at the time that it was repealed.
Mm.
So I don't feel like, to me, that never was given a fair chance. But the other thing is that even if decriminalization didn't change drug use or overdose, it still changes lives because you're not giving people those criminal records for behaviors that are going to trail them for the rest of their life. But the reality is 18 months was not sort of a fair chance to
Mm.
see whether that law was going to work. And it's just very frustrating after 50 years of war on
Yeah.
drugs that hasn't worked. And this is the window of opportunity that program had to be effective.
That's a very valid point because I also read too when that happened, people were like, we're all in an uproar. And someone said, look, it's not like just because it's legalized, someone that's never done drugs is going to go out and buy drugs
Right,
now.
right.
It's true because like if where I live, if the state legalized it, I'm not gonna be like, well, shit, I'm gonna go try crack now, No, that's just not my
No.
thing, So that is that's an interesting perspective. Do you think that maybe the state should have tiered the rollout of that decriminalization, where maybe it wasn't just blanket, maybe they started with, marijuana and, something else, and then a couple years down the line do something else? Or do you think it was just opening the floodgates too soon, or
Well, I mean, from a public perception standard, maybe. I do think that one of the things with Oregon is that there were that promises were made that weren't likely to come to be. In other words, people expected more change faster than was
Mm,
realistically going to happen, and I think that was part of the negative reaction to it.
mhm,
But also, I mean, fentanyl overdose, explosion, it terrifies people, and
mhm,
they don't know what to do. But I will also say, to your point about people don't pick up drugs because they're legal, there is very clear data that states that have the more punitive drug laws on their books, and
mhm,
states that have the more liberal drug laws on their books, the more punitive drug law states do not have lower drug use rates, do not have lower addiction rates, and do not have lower overdose rates.
mhm,
So those increased penalties don't reduce any of that. They just destroy lives.
mhm,
And again, the money would be better used, in my mind, to offer treatment, harm reduction, and other
mhm.
supports.
The same thing could be said about gun laws too. The states that have the strictest gun laws are the ones that have the highest gun crime. For example, Illinois, right? Chicago has the highest murder rate. They also have the highest, or the strongest gun laws in the U.S.
Well, I mean, I'm not a gun law expert, but I know one of the issues is it's hard to put the border around a gun, right?
Mhm. Just like drugs, right? If it's illegal, people are
Yeah.
going to find a way to get it.
I know it's funny when I talk to some people and they say, "Well, how do people get drugs?" As if it's difficult. And I say, "It's never been in my lifetime. It's never been hard to get drugs, right?
Right?
It may be momentarily hard to get your favorite drug,
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
okay, but it's never hard to get drugs, and it's a fallacy. It's a fantasy to think that it is."
Hmm, hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Are you still in California now?
Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area.
Okay. Um, the, I agree with you. I think that many of these states that still have the criminalization of drug, like marijuana, for example, right? Like, why are we throwing people in jail if they got a joint or a little bit of weed on them? That to me just it, it blows my mind, because more deaths happen from alcohol
Yes,
with DUIs, DWIs, all of that stuff than with marijuana, right?
yes.
It blows my mind.
Yes, I mean, alcohol isn't legal because it's a less damaging drug to the individual or to society. It's
Hmm.
legal for historical reasons. I
Right.
mean, that's really all that it is. We do, I mean, alcohol, even with the drug overdose, crisis, alcohol still kills more people every year than all the other drugs
Correct.
combined, except for cigarettes. And people underappreciate that.
Hmm.
It's also harder on the body. It looks like, than things like
Yes.
cannabis.
Correct.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, we are still studying cannabis. One of the things with cannabis was that we weren't allowed to study it for a long time, and now
Hmm.
that we're studying it, we're fine. I mean, it's not risk free, right? And
Sure.
from my point of view, I just want people to know, to be informed of the real risk, not the exaggerated risks and not the minimized risk, but
Hmm.
let's tell people the true risks for all of these drugs so that they can make informed choices. That's really where I think we should be.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't view it as my decision what you consume if you're an adult and you're not hurting anyone else. I don't think it's my business.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big proponent for psilocybin, because I know that the same with ketamine. There's a lot of mental health benefits potentially with microdosing of psilocybin. Even acid has been shown. Microdosing acid has been shown to help with PTSD and trauma and whatnot. uh, you know, I know that they're starting to do studies with that stuff now, but there's so much legality behind it that it's preventing the studies from being able to do, a full blown look into it.
Yeah, and hallucinogens are harder to study because it's hard to not know that you're getting the real thing versus a placebo, right? For
Hmm.
other drugs, you can hide it better than you can hide it with hallucinogens. And they're trying to figure out a way around that. Now, again, but hallucinogens aren't risk free. If you have any kind of psychosis in your family history, you shouldn't be using
Sure.
hallucinogens. And the therapeutic approach, it's usually in in a certain specific environment with supervision, with, the dose that what you're getting, not something off of the street where, you don't really know how strong. I mean, there's all those parameters around it.
Yep.
But you're right. If it's anything, as I said, anything that looks like it might be helpful, I think we should study it, and then we can roll it out and treat people in the appropriate way so we get the benefits with minimal risks.
Yeah, totally agree. I want to go backwards a little bit. So one of the things that you said earlier that helped you get sober was you were with a partner that was about ready to kick you out. What ended up happening with that relationship? Still together or moved on?
Still together.
Wow, that's great.
I will say so in rehab they do these like family sessions,
Yeah.
and my husband, well, he wasn't my husband then, he was my partner, but he would come up and he would say things like, I think it's too late. I think she's, she burned too many bridges. I can't trust her. Like, he was really like, but he did let me come home, and he sort of stood back to see what was going to happen. And then also we were in couples counseling for 2 years. I was in individual therapy, for my PTSD and very, very severe anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a lot of work to do, but we are still together. It is a very, happy marriage. I will say it's been the biggest surprise of my life, because I didn't know that happy, supportive, loving marriages existed on earth. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, it wasn't on my goal list because I didn't think it was real.
Yes. That's amazing. I love hearing that. I mean, when you got out of rehab, after you said five months, right?
Mm-hmm.
How was that feeling? Did you like, I would imagine that you're okay. You're coming out of rehab. You've done all this work in rehab, but now you're back to, quote unquote reality. Right. And now you've got this partner that is kind of questioning whether or not you're going to be able to stay true. And then you're doing all of this therapy on top of it, both couples and individually. So all of this stuff is coming to the surface. Did those feelings coming to the surface make you like feel like you need to use again, or what was that like?
Well, I will say a couple things. That one is that I did not have perfect abstinence from day one. Most people do not have perfect abstinence from day one. So I used 3 times in my first 5 months, which, was a vast improvement over my everyday use for mostly the last 10 years, but it wasn't perfect. But the last time I used was a few days after I got home from rehab. The other thing that I'll add to that is that I not only had all that to do, but I had to find a substance use and addiction recovery program that worked better for me than what I was being forced into in rehab. So my rehab was like vehemently and adamantly 12 steps only. And 12 steps, of course, is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of the Anonymouses. And 12 steps is a good fit for many people, but it's not a good fit for a lot of other people. And it was a really poor fit for me. But my rehab told me, this is in 93, 94, they swore there was no other option. They said, they kept telling me, you're going to fail, Mary Beth, because you won't do what we tell you. We won't do everything we tell you exactly the way we tell you to do it, right? And so I was really fearful about that. Like, what if they're right? They're the experts. What if they're right? But when I got home, I not only had to do what you talked about, but I actually had to do research and find other addiction recovery groups that were a better fit for me. And I will also mention to the viewers that it's January of 94. Like, there's no Google. I can't just type it on the computer.
Right. You're going to the library.
I went to the library and I found other options. And so I used like the parent organization to what today is Life Rings Secular Recovery. I used Women for Sobriety, the Parent the Smart. And so I was putting together a recovery program that worked for me, and I'm trying to get back to work. So there's a lot going on in early recovery. But I'll also say one of the smart things I did is I actually prioritized. So when I got home from rehab, I sat down and made a list of everything that I needed to work on, because I had destroyed, pretty much every aspect of my life. And now I will caveat that with, it turns out that list was not comprehensive. I thought it was everything, but it turns out it wasn't. But it was long, and I knew enough to know I cannot possibly work on all of this right now. I have to prioritize. And so I decided 5 priorities: my sobriety, my relationship with my partner, getting back to work, working on my trauma, in mental health treatment, and trying to get my debt under control.
Mm.
And that was like everything else. Even if I could see it, I couldn't focus on it. I couldn't work on it. It was just not viable to work. That's already a lot,
Mhm,
and so
mhm.
that's where I focus. Just these things. Everything else has to wait.
Mm. And so how long do you think it took before you started you know, maybe seeing the light at the end of the tunnel?
I will say that by about 18 months, I was in pretty good shape, and so the first 18 months, every day I did something related to my sobriety or my mental health. So I was in individual therapy and then couples counseling, and 5 days a week I went to one program meeting or another. Like I was
Mm.
mixing. I did multiple different types of groups, but I did 5 a week. And then at 18 months, I felt like I was in a good enough place that I could start to reduce that. So I started dropping one recovery meeting at a time. Like I give up, like one, and then I wait, 2 months maybe, and see, okay, well, I think I can give up another. And so gradually I started unwinding the amount of time I had to sort of hyper focus on my recovery.
Mhm.
I would say by 2.5 to 3 years, I never really struggled with my sobriety after that. And I
Mm.
think that's a common pattern. Some people talk as if for the rest of your life you have to hyper focus on your sobriety. You're always at risk. Any second you could lose it. That's not been my experience, and that's not the experience of most people I know.
Mm.
Now, I'll also say I don't take it casually. Like I don't mess around the edges. I am certainly open to going back to therapy. I've done it twice. After I stopped, I've gone back twice for periods of time. If I needed to go back to support meetings, I would. I'm on the board for She Recovers. I do a monthly meeting with them, mostly about my anxiety, which I still struggle with. But for most of us, it takes 18 to 36 months to really feel like we've got a pretty solid foundation in our sobriety. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you think that obviously you're a completely different person, right, after going through all of that. Do you think that your husband also is also a completely different person?
He changed a lot. I will say one of his surprises was that I was mad at him too. Like, that shocked him. I felt like he saw me, you know, deteriorating, and he didn't do a lot to help me. Like he never went out and found treatment or providers or anything, but he was so overwhelmed by what was happening and he didn't know what to do. Maybe
Mhm.
today it would be different, but yeah, he first we both had to learn to listen. We both had to learn to I would yell and he would shut down. Like that was sort of
Mm.
like our communicate. So I had to learn to like lower my energy and my tone, and he had to learn to be able to listen to me, but also to be able to verbalize what was going on with him. And
Mm.
that was a challenge. We had to work on negotiating disagreements, right? Who's going to win this disagreement? And I think in the long run, it ended up being whoever cares more wins. Like that's sort of like how it went. And we do have a lot of we leave each other a lot of individual autonomy. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of individual. These are the communal decisions. These are the communal things, and these are the separate things.
Mhm.
So, but it was definitely a process where we both had to learn a lot of different skills to be able not just to stay together, but to actually really enjoy the relationship, feel supported in the relationship, feel really totally bonded as a couple. It was a lot of work for both of us.
That's so amazing that you guys were able to do that, and on top of you getting sober at the same time, that is quite an undertaking. I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
And you guys have been together how long now?
41 years. I
Wow,
know.
amazing.
I know. Yeah.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome. I love hearing that. Um, so now that you're retired and you're doing all of this other stuff, and you have a book, your book is out now.
My book's been out for 2 years. It's on Amazon and all the usual sites or bookstores have it or can get it. Again, from junkie to judge. That's all you have to remember.
Hmm. And
Yeah, and I will say I try to make the book useful. Like the book is really structured. The first third of the book is my pre-drug childhood because
hmm
I don't think that is talked about enough. Like what led up to the addiction? Like
hmm
why did it seem a good idea. And then in the middle, sort of the usual memoir stories about the chaos and, misery of addiction. But the last third is my first 3 years of recovery, because I wanted to show a sort of more realistic example and how I sort of built a plan that worked for me. So again, everything for me is about how can I be of use? And so I wanted to structure the book in a way that I thought would sort of be an example to share. It's a story, it's written like a novel, but it's also sort of sharing information about what leads to addiction and what recovery can look like.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, because I know this is a big component of recovery and rehab, do you think that you've become a more religious person after going through all of that?
No. I mean, I
Mm.
certainly did. Look, some people gain faith in the process or strengthen their faith. A lot of people are more spiritual, but that can also change. Like some people might, get very religious in the beginning, and then 3 or 4 years later, they're more interested in, let's see what the Buddhists have to say, or
Yeah.
let's look at meditation or yoga.
Mm-hmm.
I was never, when I started recovery, I was not religious. I would categorize myself as atheist.
Mm.
I mean, I certainly respect religious recovery. It helps a lot of people. Whatever works, even in Life Ring, we're secular recovery, but a lot of our members have faith, and we don't care about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
just about a different approach to recovery.
Mm.
So now I wouldn't say people in general get more religious. Certainly, some people may get more involved in their religion in their early recovery. Whether that changes over time is a different question.
Mm. How long were you a judge for again?
5.5 years.
Do you miss any part of law?
I mean, the intellectual stimulation, I like, brain activities. In fact, I'll say it's part of the reason I wrote the book is because it was a new intellectual stimulation to figure out how to write a good memoir. Like, that's actually different than legal writing, it turns out. A
Yeah.
whole different set.
Yeah.
So I do miss the intellectual stimulation, but this is, but I couldn't do what I was doing now when I was working, right? Being retired has allowed me to talk openly about my story in a new way. And so I really thought about that. So I got to think about two things. One is, what do I want to do in my retirement? Like, where do I want to, what area do I want to work? And then for me, it was obviously going to be something recovery related.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also got to think about, well, there's a lot of things I could do in the recovery space, right? What do I like doing that I could do in the recovery space? So I like writing. I like talking to people. I like, engaging with people, sharing information, analyzing all of that. So I try to make a role where I felt like it would add value to my, community, and to the people that I'm interacting with, but also the things that I enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice you get to sort of pick pick how you spend your retirement, and hopefully you'll pick things that you find rewarding and interesting.
Mm. With a lot of the rehab that's out there, and I know like sometimes insurance will cover rehab, sometimes it comes from government dollars. Are those state funded or federal funded dollars, or both?
Both. So a lot of Medicaid is the number one treatment provider in America.
Mm.
A lot of private insurance. Private insurance, a lot of times it's limited on what it'll pay, right? You might get to go to 28-day program, but you can't go longer, or
Mm.
they'll pay for aftercare, but they'll be evaluating it every week to see whether you still need to go. So it's a very mixed bag. In California, we've had Medicaid expansion, and so some of that's going to be state dollars as well. In California, you can actually, if you've paid into unemployment, you're actually paying into unemployment and disability.
Mm.
And if you need to go into, and if you have paid in, you can, substance treatment counts as part of your disability, benefits, so it's a mixed bag. And then of course there are private, or semi-public funded places that, like, counties will fund something where, so people without monies can go to this program. It's funded by the counties or whatever. So it varies, but Medicaid is the biggest. Well, it won't be anymore because they're cutting Medicaid, but it was the number one provider of treatment.
So what advice would you give somebody that wants to go to rehab, needs to go to rehab, but knows that they're limited in the amount of dollars that'll be paid for their rehab? Because like you mentioned earlier, 30 days is not enough. If somebody needs 6 months, how does somebody, they might get the first 28 days, but how does somebody afford to pay for the remainder of those 4, 5, 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on where you are in the country, because
Mhm.
some states offer more options than others. Like, you may be able to get a mental health a therapist who's you're going to see you, who has addiction training. I mean, ask, right? So if you're looking for a therapist, you really have the right to question them. You should question them. Do you have expertise in addiction? What is your expertise before you hook up with them? Not all therapists are educated about helping somebody with a substance use disorder. But the reality is that sometimes your only viable option is going to be meetings and peer support programs. And so
Mm.
then you'll have choices. I mean, 12 steps are by far the largest. Pretty AA in particular is pretty much in every town.
Mhm.
Even if that's not if now the other programs like Life Ring and She Recovers and Women for Sobriety, they all have in-person meetings, but not in every town. But it's not 1994 anymore, and there's the internet now.
Right.
And so no matter where you are in the country, you can access multiple different peer support programs. They all have different philosophies and different strategies and techniques and different meeting formats, and for some people that's really all they're going to be able to access. That's unfortunate, but
Mhm.
true.
Mhm.
If you're committed, you can make that work. And building up a sober community can be really helpful. Evaluating who in your family and friends group is going to actually be helpful to you during your especially early recovery, and who isn't, and making choices about distancing some people, and all those kind of things.
Mhm.
Talk to people who have in your local community who have done it before you. If you go to a local meeting, you can find out from people, hey, if I don't have insurance, what do people do here? What are the resource options? There may be a county office that will help you navigate, like a social worker or something
Mm.
like that will help you navigate locally. But yeah, it is unfortunate that we don't have like an easy way for everybody to get what they need. So you have to fight. Look, my rehab wasn't right for me, and I had to find a way to make it work,
Yeah.
because that was all I was able to get. I didn't have insurance and I didn't have cash, and that was the only place I could get in.
Yeah. I mean, it's with anything in life, right? You gotta be able to wanna do the work, put the work in.
You've got to be able to want to do it, but as a society, we don't want to put barriers up that are, we don't want to put more barriers in people's way
Mhm.
than should be there. I mean, we
Mhm.
want them to have the initiative, the ownership, but at the
Mhm.
same time, we can make it. We can put up obstacles that are going to mean that some people aren't going to make it through the race, right? And
Mhm.
so
Yeah. Great advice. Mary Beth, thank you so much for coming on. Are you on social media or anything?
I am. So on my website is junkie2judge.com, and there's my opinion pieces and other info. I'm on X. I'm at Mary Beth O _. I'm on Blue Sky, Mary Beth O'Connor, and I'm on LinkedIn. And I will say again, I only post about those topic areas we talked about. And
Yeah.
so I share information, I share my recovery thoughts. That's all I do on social media.
That's very smart. Okay, I'll be sure to add that all to the show notes. I'll also add the link to your book on Amazon. I really appreciate you coming on. I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. It's been a great experience. I appreciate it as well.
Thank you.